I stepped into my childhood home for the first holiday dinner in 3 years, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "Still using food stamps, Brigitte?" she asked loudly, champagne sloshing in her glass. The room fell silent. Dad nervously adjusted his Rolex. Mom studied her plate. That's when Thomas, Jessica's new butler, entered carrying tomorrow's advance copy of Forbes. The magazine slipped from his white-gloved hands, landing face up on the marble floor. Everyone froze. The Uber ride back to my apartment felt surreal. I kicked off my heels and curled up on my sofa, staring at the city lights through my window. 3 years of secrecy were about to end, and my mind raced back to where it all began. Growing up in our colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut, I was always the different sister. While Jessica was the quintessential golden child with her perfect blonde hair and magnetic social presence, I was the awkward one with unruly brown curls, who preferred taking apart computers to attending school dances. Jessica collected friends like trophies: homecoming queen, sorority president, business school at an Ivy League university, the conventional path to success that my parents worshipped. I still remember Dad proudly introducing her at their country club parties. My daughter Jessica, top of her class at Wharton. Meanwhile, I was the family oddball, the one who built her first website at 11 and won the state science competition at 14. The competition my parents missed because Jessica had a tennis tournament the same weekend. "Your sister understands the real world," Mom would say. "Computers are fine as a hobby, Brigitte, but you need something practical to fall back on." But computers weren't a hobby to me. They were oxygen. When I wrote code, the world made sense in a way it never did at family dinners or school social events. During my junior year at MIT, I developed an encryption algorithm that could revolutionize data security. My professor called it groundbreaking. That same week, I made the hardest decision of my life, dropping out to develop it into a real product. I still remember that dinner table scene. Dad's face turned scarlet as he slammed his fist down. Absolutely not. No daughter of mine is becoming a college dropout. Mom dabbed at tears with her linen napkin. "Why do you always have to be difficult, Brigitte? Why can't you be sensible like your sister?" Jessica, home from business school for the weekend, couldn't hide her smirk. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm sure there's good money in being a basement-dwelling computer geek. She can design websites for your garden club." The worst came later that night. Dad called me into his study, his voice coldly formal. "If you go through with this, you're on your own. Not a penny of support. Your choice." I chose my dream, packed my belongings into my beaten-up Honda, and moved to a tiny studio apartment in Boston. The following months were brutal. My savings evaporated. Rent, food, and basic server costs to develop my prototype consumed everything. 6 months in, I reached a low point I never thought possible, applying for food stamps just to eat while I coded 18 hours a day. I called home once during that period. Jessica answered. "Oh, the dropout's calling," she announced loudly, before passing the phone to Mom, who sounded distant and distracted. I was working on debugging a critical component of my algorithm when my laptop pinged. Someone was attempting to access my cloud storage. I tracked the intrusion attempt back to its source and discovered the unthinkable. Jessica had tried to hack into my development files. Initially, I thought she was just being nosy, but further investigation revealed a devastating truth. Jessica had accessed earlier versions of my algorithm designs from a shared cloud drive I'd forgotten about, files from before I dropped out. She'd sold them to a competitor for $50,000. I confronted her via text. Her response was chilling. "Consider it compensation for embarrassing the family. Besides, you abandoned those projects when you left school." The money, I later learned from Mom's casual conversation, funded Jessica's lavish graduation party, the party to which I wasn't invited. Starting from scratch wasn't just discouraging. It was soul-crushing. While Jessica had stolen my early work, she couldn't steal the knowledge in my head. But rebuilding meant more months of financial struggle. I moved to a smaller apartment in a questionable neighborhood to save on rent. My daily routine became mechanical. Starbucks barista from 5 to 11 in the morning, data entry temp work from noon to 6, food delivery app driver until midnight, then coding until my eyes couldn't focus. Sleep for 4 hours. Repeat. The physical toll was visible in my gaunt face and the dark circles under my eyes. The emotional toll was harder to see but cut deeper. There were nights I sobbed into my pillow, questioning everything. During one particularly grueling week, I spilled a customer's venti latte all over myself. While changing my shirt in the back room, I overheard 2 regular customers discussing a fascinating security challenge their company faced. One mentioned needing someone who understood advanced cryptography. Mustering all my courage, I approached their table before leaving my shift. I couldn't help overhearing. "I might be able to help with your security issue." The woman, Diane, regarded me skeptically. She was in her 50s, with silver, streaked hair and sharp eyes behind modern glasses. "You're a barista who knows enterprise. Level cryptography?" "I'm a cryptography specialist who makes coffee to pay rent," I corrected her. She raised an eyebrow, then slid a business card across the table. "My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Diane became my first mentor and believer. A programmer herself since the 80s, she'd faced her own battles in the male-dominated tech world. She couldn't offer me a job at her company due to hiring freezes, but she provided something more valuable: validation, guidance, and occasional use of proper development equipment. "What you're building could change secure communication as we know it," she said, after reviewing my new approach. "But you need to protect yourself better this time." With Diane's encouragement, I refined my encryption system, creating something even more innovative than my original concept. By living on ramen and working myself to exhaustion, I managed to develop a working prototype. Meanwhile, Jessica's life continued its picture, perfect trajectory. She got engaged to Taylor Williams, a hedge fund manager from a good family with a summer home in the Hamptons. Their engagement party made the society pages of the local newspaper. I learned about it from my mother's brief, awkward phone call the day after. "It was such a beautiful event, Brigitte. Everyone was there. The unspoken message was clear. Everyone except me." When I checked Jessica's social media, the pain of exclusion hit harder than I expected. There were my parents, beaming proudly beside Jessica and her fiancé. The caption read, "Family is everything." Yet a small breakthrough finally came my way. My prototype caught the attention of Patrick Green, an angel investor known for taking chances on unconventional founders. After 3 meetings, he seemed genuinely excited about my technology's potential. "This could be the foundation for something remarkable," he said during our last meeting. "Let me run some numbers and we can discuss terms next week." Hope flickered to life. Maybe, finally, things were turning around. That Thanksgiving mom guilt tripped me into attending dinner. "It might be Grandma's last holiday," she said, though Grandma had been in robust health for years. The dinner was predictably uncomfortable. Jessica dominated the conversation with wedding planning details and stories about Taylor's recent promotion. The 5-carat diamond on her finger flashed under the dining room chandelier with her every gesture. "So, Brigitte," she said during dessert, turning attention my way for the first time that evening, "still doing your computer thing?" Before I could answer, she continued, "You know, the mall is hiring seasonal staff. Might be good to have something stable." I stayed silent about my potential investor, still stinging from her previous betrayal. Why give her more ammunition? 2 days later, Patrick called to cancel our meeting. His tone was cool, professional. "After further consideration, I don't think this is the right investment for me at this time." Something felt off. Patrick had been enthusiastic just days before. I reached out to Diane, who still had connections in the investment community. What she discovered left me nauseous. "Someone contacted Patrick with concerns about your reliability," Diane reported back. "Mentioned potential mental health issues and a pattern of unfinished projects. A family member, Brigitte." "Your sister." Jessica had done it again. But this time, she hadn't just stolen from me. She had actively sabotaged my one chance at funding. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the wall, surrounded by eviction warnings and past due notices. My laptop screen glowed in the dark room, mockingly displaying my brilliant code that might never see the light of day. Rock bottom has a clarity to it. With nothing left to lose, desperation crystallized into determination. If I couldn't get conventional funding, I'd find another way. If my own family wouldn't support me, I'd succeed without them. If Jessica could use underhanded tactics, I could use strategic silence. Around 3 in the morning, the epiphany struck. I'd been approaching the problem all wrong. My encryption technology wasn't just a product to sell to the highest bidder. It was a foundation for something much bigger, a completely secure messaging platform that companies would pay to use. The next day, I made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I would go completely stealth mode. No more seeking high-profile investors, no announcements about what I was building, no social media presence. Second, I would use a pseudonym professionally. BG would be the only identity attached to my work. Third, I would focus on building a service, not just selling a technology. With this new clarity, I posted on an obscure developer forum seeking a collaborator. I was honest about having no money but passionate about the vision. Austin responded within hours. A brilliant programmer with a background in system architecture, he was between jobs and intrigued by my technical description. We met at a coffee shop, where I carefully explained my vision while withholding my personal history. "This could take months before we see any revenue," I warned him. "I can't pay you." Austin sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Sometimes the most valuable currency isn't money. It's the chance to build something that matters. He extended his hand. "I'm in." We became an unlikely team. Austin took contract work 3 days a week while I continued my 3 jobs. Nights and weekends became a blur of coding, testing, and planning our stealth launch. My tiny apartment transformed into our unofficial headquarters, with whiteboards propped against every wall. 6 months of relentless work later, we had a functioning, secure messaging platform that offered businesses unprecedented data protection. Rather than announcing it publicly, we strategically approached 3 mid-sized companies with known security concerns, offering free trials. The first company signed a paid contract within 2 weeks. The second followed a month later. By the 6-month mark, word had spread quietly through specific industries about our platform's effectiveness. We were still small, but cash flow positive. Austin and I could finally quit our other jobs and focus entirely on our growing company, which we named Secure Node. Through it all, I maintained my personal anonymity. In client meetings, I introduced myself only as BG and kept my backstory vague. Our official company paperwork listed a corporate entity as founder, not me personally. I was building a fortress around not just our digital security but my own. Jessica's extravagant wedding arrived that summer. Mom insisted I attend, and despite my better judgment, I went. The ceremony was held at the country club where Dad had been a member for 30 years, followed by a reception for 300 guests. I was seated at the farthest table, next to elderly relatives who couldn't hear well, and a drunk cousin no one wanted to talk to. My place card read Bridget instead of Brigitte. During the cocktail hour, I overheard 2 of Jessica's friends near the ladies' room. "That's the sister," one whispered. "The one who dropped out of college." "God, what a waste," the other replied. "Jessica says she's basically doing nothing with her life. Such a shame when you compare the 2 of them." I smiled into my champagne glass, thinking of the contract I'd finalized that morning worth over $1 million. Sometimes invisibility had its advantages. What I didn't know then was that Jessica's perfect facade concealed serious problems. After the wedding, she convinced Dad to let her take a leadership role in the family's commercial real estate business. Dad was approaching retirement age, and Jessica, with her business degree, seemed the natural successor. What no one realized was that Jessica had developed expensive habits during her time with hedge fund managers and their wives. Her taste for luxury had morphed into something unsustainable. Taylor's income, while substantial, couldn't match their spending. When she gained partial control of the family business, Jessica began making increasingly risky investments, leveraging existing properties to acquire more. Dad trusted her judgment completely, believing her Wharton education guaranteed financial wisdom. I discovered this by accident during a rare phone call with my father. He mentioned casually that they'd temporarily moved out of the family home into a smaller house while some business transitions settled. Jessica says it's the smart move right now, he explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. The market's a bit volatile, but she's confident things will turn around soon. That evening, I asked Austin to do some discreet research into my family's business holdings. What he found was alarming. The company had taken on massive debt in the past 18 months. Several properties were underperforming, and 2 were in pre-foreclosure. Whoever's running this is playing a dangerous game, Austin said, unaware he was describing my sister. They're using new loans to pay old debts. It's a house of cards. Yet, despite the mounting evidence of Jessica's mismanagement, my parents continued defending her business decisions to anyone who questioned them. Their faith in her remained unshakable, even as their financial security crumbled. I debated whether to intervene, but remembered how my warnings had been dismissed in the past. They wouldn't believe me over Jessica, especially about business matters. So I watched from afar, focusing instead on growing SecureNode into something remarkable. 3 years passed in this strange parallel existence. By day, I was BG, the mysterious founder of a rapidly expanding security company now serving Fortune 500 clients and government agencies. By night, I was just Brigitte, living in a secure but modest apartment, driving a mid-range car and sending birthday cards to family members who rarely responded. I created a foundation providing tech education in underserved communities, but did so anonymously. The work, not the recognition, was what mattered to me now. Then came the call that changed everything. My mother's name appeared on my phone screen for the first time in months. "Brigitte," she said, her voice strained. "I need to see you. It's important." We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Mom looked older, tired, in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect manicure was chipped. For a moment, I hoped for reconciliation. Perhaps she'd finally recognized the pain their favoritism had caused. Maybe she wanted to rebuild our relationship. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out mortgage documents. "We need a loan, Brigitte, just until things stabilize." Her voice wavered between pride and desperation. "The bank is foreclosing on the house." When I asked for details, the truth emerged in painful fragments. Jessica had convinced my parents to remortgage their fully paid home to inject cash into the failing business. She'd promised it was temporary, a strategic move to weather market fluctuations. Now the loan was underwater, the business was hemorrhaging money, and my parents faced losing everything. Yet even in this desperate moment, Mom couldn't help defending Jessica. "She's under so much pressure, especially with the baby coming. Taylor's firm has had cutbacks, and they have the new house expenses. Jessica's doing her best." I listened silently, wondering if my mother could hear the irony in her words. Jessica, the golden child with every advantage, had driven the family to financial ruin. Yet still, they made excuses for her. "I'll need to think about it," I said finally. As I walked Mom to her car, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from our company publicist. "Call immediately. Forbes situation. They know who you are." My publicist Linda's voice was tense on the phone. After dropping my mother off, I'd driven straight to our secure office building to return the call. "What exactly do they know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything, Brigitte. Forbes has been investigating for their secretive billionaires issue. They've confirmed you're BG, and they're running the story. You're going to be on the cover." My carefully constructed anonymity was about to shatter. For 3 years, I'd kept my identity hidden, even as SecureNode grew into a technology powerhouse valued at over $4 billion. Now, overnight, I would be thrust into the spotlight. "When?" I managed to ask. "The issue hits newsstands the day after tomorrow. Digital edition goes live at midnight. They're sending us an advance copy as a courtesy." Linda paused. "This changes everything." Indeed it did. As I sat in my office processing this bombshell, I thought about the stark contrast between my public and private lives. While I now had more wealth than I could spend in several lifetimes, I'd chosen to live modestly. My apartment was comfortable but not extravagant. I drove a Toyota instead of a Lamborghini. I owned exactly 3 designer items, all gifts from Diane. My wealth had gone toward things that mattered to me, funding our research, providing exceptional benefits to our employees, and supporting my foundation's work in technology education. Not once had I flaunted my success or sought validation from the family that had dismissed me. Meanwhile, Jessica had been maintaining appearances at all costs. Through business contacts, I'd learned that she and Taylor had purchased a $7 million mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in Greenwich. They employed a full household staff, including the butler who had unwittingly delivered the Forbes magazine to the family dinner. Jessica drove a new Range Rover, vacationed in private villas, and dressed exclusively in designer clothing, all while the family business crumbled beneath the weight of her mismanagement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica, who had every advantage, was secretly drowning in debt. I, who had been cut off and left to struggle, had built something truly valuable. After 3 years of minimal contact, I received a text from Jessica about the annual holiday dinner at her home. Usually, I declined these invitations, sending a polite gift instead. This year felt different. With the Forbes issue about to break, perhaps it was time to close this chapter of my life. I texted back my acceptance. The evening of the dinner arrived. I dressed simply in a black sheath dress and pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry. Just me, finally comfortable in my own skin. Jessica's mansion was exactly as ostentatious as I'd imagined. A circular driveway led to a columned entrance where a uniformed valet took my car keys with a barely disguised look of disappointment at my modest Toyota. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Original artwork adorned walls covered in silk wallpaper. Fresh flower arrangements the size of small trees filled every corner. The perfection felt desperate somehow, as if the house were screaming for approval. "Brigitte, you made it." Jessica Eyre kissed near my cheeks, her eyes quickly assessing and dismissing my simple attire. Love the vintage look. So sustainable. She wore a red designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her hair was expensively highlighted, her makeup flawless. Yet something in her eyes looked brittle, like thin ice over deep water. "Everyone, look who's here!" she announced to the gathering in the living room. My little sister finally graced us with her presence. Dad approached with a half-hearted hug. "Good to see you, sweetheart," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. He looked older, the confidence I remembered replaced with a subtle uneasiness. Mom hovered nearby, shooting me pleading glances. She'd called twice since our cafe meeting, increasingly desperate about the loan. I hadn't yet given her an answer. Jessica introduced me to her friends, a collection of polished couples who looked at me with the mild curiosity one might direct at an unusual houseplant. "Brigitte's in. Computers, right?" Jessica said vaguely. "Something with websites or tech support, isn't it?" Before I could answer, she swept the conversation in another direction, detailing her recent charity gala chairmanship and the celebrities who had attended. Dinner was served in the formal dining room by 3 uniformed staff members. Thomas, the butler, directed the service with practiced precision. The table was set with what appeared to be antique silver and hand-painted china. Wine flowed from bottles with labels I recognized as exceptionally expensive vintages. All this extravagance while my parents faced foreclosure. The conversation revolved around Jessica's social circle, who was renovating which mansion, whose child had been accepted to which elite preschool, which exclusive resort had the best new chef. My attempts to participate were subtly but consistently blocked by Jessica, who either talked over me or redirected the conversation whenever I spoke. As dessert was being served, Jessica's attention finally turned to me, but not in the way I would have wished. "So, Brigitte," she said loudly, ensuring everyone at the table could hear, "I noticed you're still driving that same car from years ago. Things still tight for you?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mom stared at her plate. "I manage," I replied simply. Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, if you ever need help with job connections, Taylor knows people who might be able to use someone with basic computer skills." "Right, honey?" Taylor nodded absently, already reaching for more wine. "Still using food stamps, Brigitte," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with false concern. Champagne sloshed in her glass as she gestured. Because we could arrange a little family fund if things are really desperate. The room fell silent. Dad choked slightly on his wine but said nothing in my defense. Mom studied her plate with sudden, intense interest. Jessica's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. That's when Thomas entered the dining room, carrying a small stack of packages and mail. "Pardon the interruption, ma'am," he addressed Jessica, "but this just arrived by courier, marked urgent." Among the items was a thick envelope bearing the Forbes logo. The magazine slipped from Thomas's white-gloved hands, landing face up on the marble floor. The cover was clearly visible to everyone at the table. My face stared back at us below the headline, "Meet Tech's most secretive billionaire CEO." Before anyone could react, Jessica abruptly stood. "Brigitte, could I speak with you in the kitchen?" Now. I followed her through the swinging door into the massive chef's kitchen, currently empty as the staff served dessert. The moment we were alone, Jessica's composed facade cracked. Her hands shook as she gripped the marble countertop. "I need your help," she whispered, voice suddenly stripped of its usual condescension. "Everything's falling apart." For the first time since we were children, Jessica looked at me without the filter of competition or judgment. Pure fear shone in her eyes. "I've done something terrible, Brigitte. The business, Mom and Dad's house, it's all gone. Worse than gone." Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. "I'm under federal investigation for embezzlement." Even expecting something bad, this confession shocked me. "Embezzlement?" Jessica nodded miserably. "I took money from client accounts to cover personal expenses, then from other accounts to replace that money, then more to cover those. It spiraled." She glanced toward the dining room. "Nobody knows, not even Taylor. He thinks we're wealthy from family money and my brilliant business acumen." I stared at my sister, this woman who had sabotaged me, mocked me, and stolen from me, now reduced to begging for my help. "Please," she whispered, somehow managing to sound both desperate and condescending. "I know you have some savings from your little computer job. I just need enough to replace what I took before the audit next week. After that, I can figure something out." Even in her desperation, Jessica couldn't conceive that my little computer job might be significant. She had no idea who she was really talking to. Before I could respond, she straightened her shoulders and wiped away a tear that threatened to ruin her mascara. "We should get back before they wonder what's happening. Just think about it, okay? For Mom and Dad's sake." We returned to the dining room where an uncomfortable silence had fallen. The Forbes magazine still lay on the floor where it had fallen, my face staring up at the crystal chandelier. Thomas bent to retrieve the fallen magazine, but Jessica stopped him with a sharp gesture. "Leave it," she commanded, her voice once again controlled and confident. It was remarkable how quickly she could rebuild her facade. "Bring coffee for everyone." As Thomas retreated, Jessica reclaimed her position at the head of the table and raised her wine glass. "A toast to family gatherings," she announced, deliberately drawing attention away from the magazine on the floor, "and to success, however we measure it." Her pointed glance in my direction made her meaning clear. Her definition of success was this mansion, these important friends, this picture, perfect life. "Speaking of success," she continued smoothly, "Brigitte, you never did tell us exactly what you're doing these days. Still freelancing with those website things?" Every eye turned to me. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility. I could feel the weight of years of dismissal and underestimation, the weight of Jessica's desperate kitchen confession, the weight of my parents' silent complicity in my sister's cruelty. And beneath it all, the Forbes magazine on the floor, about to change everything. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. Actually, I founded a company. "Oh?" Jessica's tone was indulgent, like an adult responding to a child's imagination. "What kind of company, dear?" "A cybersecurity firm. We provide encryption services." Dad nodded vaguely, clearly not understanding or particularly interested. "That's nice, sweetheart." Jessica couldn't resist another dig. "Well, every business needs a website designer, I suppose. Though I do hope you're setting aside something for retirement. These little startups can be so unstable." One of Jessica's friends, a woman named Amanda, who worked in finance, perked up. "What's your company called? Perhaps I've heard of it." Before I could answer, Taylor had risen from his seat and picked up the Forbes magazine from the floor. He flipped it over casually, then froze, staring at the cover. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Language, darling," Jessica admonished automatically, not yet registering his shock. Taylor looked from the magazine to me and back again. "You're BG? You're the founder of SecureNode?" The room went completely still. I could almost hear the collective intake of breath. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." Dad choked on his wine more violently this time, coughing and sputtering. Mom's wineglass slipped from her fingers, spilling red liquid across the white tablecloth. Jessica's face drained of color as she snatched the magazine from her husband's hands. Her eyes widened as she read the headline, then the first paragraph of the article. "This is a mistake," she said faintly. "It has to be." Amanda leaned forward, suddenly intensely interested. "SecureNode? The company that just signed the Department of Defense contract? The one valued at over $4 billion? I nodded. "You're that BG?" Taylor was still struggling to process the information. "The billionaire no one's ever seen?" "Until now, apparently," I said, nodding toward the magazine. The transformation around the table was immediate and dramatic. The guests who had barely acknowledged me earlier now stared in undisguised fascination. Dad's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and the beginning calculations of what this might mean for him. Mom's hand trembled as she dabbed at the spilled wine, her eyes darting between me and Jessica. Jessica herself seemed to be experiencing some kind of internal systems failure. Her perfect poise cracked, revealing raw panic underneath. "But you were struggling," she stammered. "The food stamps, the tiny apartment." "Yes, I was," I acknowledged. "After you stole my early designs and sabotaged my chance with Patrick Green, things were difficult for a while." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. This family drama was clearly more than they had bargained for with dinner. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica attempted, but her denial lacked conviction. "I think you do." My voice remained calm. "Just like I think you know exactly what's happening with the family business." Dad's head snapped up at this. "What about the business? Jessica's been handling everything brilliantly. We're just experiencing temporary market fluctuations." Jessica's friends began making discreet movements toward their purses and jackets, sensing the evening had taken an irreversible turn toward the uncomfortable. Amanda, however, leaned forward with the interest of someone watching a particularly compelling reality show. "Wait, isn't SecureNode the company that developed that unhackable messaging platform? The one that banks and government agencies use?" "The same," I confirmed. "But that would make you." Amanda did quick mental calculations. One of the 50 richest women in America. Jessica made a small, strangled sound. Dad's expression transformed entirely. Years of dismissal replaced by sudden, keen interest. "Brigitte, sweetheart, this is incredible news. Why didn't you tell us? We're your family." The audacity of his question after years of minimal contact almost made me laugh. "I tried to tell you about my work many times over the years, Dad. You weren't interested." "That's not true," Mom interjected quickly. "We've always supported your computer hobbies." "You called them hobbies," I pointed out. "You missed my coding competitions for Jessica's tennis matches. You cut me off financially when I dropped out to pursue the very work that built this company." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jessica, recovering slightly from her shock, attempted damage control. "Well, this calls for a celebration. Family is family, after all. We've always believed in you, Brigitte, in our own way." The shameless revisionism was breathtaking. I might have been impressed if I weren't so disgusted. Taylor, meanwhile, was furiously Googling on his phone under the table. SecureNode. $4 billion valuation. Founder BG. He looked up at me with new eyes, suddenly seeing dollar signs where before he'd seen only his wife's unsuccessful sister. "This is wonderful," Dad declared with forced enthusiasm. "My brilliant daughter, a technology, what do they call it? Entrepreneur. I always said you had a good head for business, didn't I, Margaret?" he appealed to my mother, who nodded vigorously. Absolutely, she agreed. We've been telling everyone how proud we are of Brigitte's computer company. The blatant lies might have hurt years ago. Now they just seemed pathetic. Actually, I said quietly, you told everyone I was throwing my life away. Dad waved a dismissive hand. Water under the bridge. Families have disagreements. What matters is we're all together now, supporting each other. Jessica, sensing an opening, jumped in. Speaking of support, Brigitte, I've been thinking about diversifying the family business. Maybe there's a way we could collaborate. Your expertise, our established client base. I almost admired her pivot. From mocking my career to proposing a business partnership in the space of 5 minutes. Jessica, I interrupted gently. I know about the embezzlement. The room went deadly silent. Jessica's face lost what little color remained. Dad looked between us in confusion. What embezzlement? He demanded. What is she talking about, Jessica? My sister's carefully constructed world was collapsing around her in real time. It's not what it sounds like, she whispered. I was just moving funds temporarily to cover some cash flow issues. By cash flow issues, do you mean the $7 million house? The 3 vacation properties? The art collection? I kept my voice neutral, not accusatory. Dad turned to Jessica, his expression hardening. Is this true? Before she could answer, I continued, addressing the larger revelation. Actually, I've known about the company's financial situation for some time. How? Dad asked. Because the federal investigators hired my company's security division to trace the money. Jessica swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. You knew? All this time? I nodded. 6 months ago, when the irregularities were first detected, the investigators contacted SecureNode to help follow the digital trail. They didn't realize I was connected to you. I recognized the company name immediately, of course. Mom was silently crying now, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup. Dad looked shocked, his worldview visibly crumbling. Jessica's friends had abandoned all pretense of not being uncomfortable and were now openly gathering their belongings. Thomas hovered awkwardly at the dining room entrance, clearly unsure whether to continue serving coffee during what had become a family crisis. We should go, one guest murmured, rising from her chair. The others quickly followed suit, making hasty excuses. Jessica didn't even attempt to stop them. Her focus remained entirely on me, her expression cycling through shock, fear, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Once the guests had been shown out, leaving only our immediate family, Thomas and Taylor, the facade of normalcy collapsed entirely. How bad is it? Dad asked Jessica directly, his voice uncharacteristically tremulous. She couldn't meet his eyes. Bad, she whispered. Very bad. Jessica took client investment funds to support her lifestyle, I explained gently. When it came time for statements or withdrawals, she moved money from other accounts to cover the shortfalls. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, though I don't think that was her intention initially. How much? Dad's question was barely audible. $8.3 million, I answered when Jessica remained silent. The color drained from Dad's face. That's everything. More than everything. The business is bankrupt, I confirmed. And there are potential criminal charges. Securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement. Mom sobbed openly now. They'll put her in prison. Taylor, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. Did you know about this? He demanded of Jessica. Did you know we were living on stolen money? Jessica's perfect composure finally shattered completely. What was I supposed to do? She cried. You lost your bonus 2 years ago. Your hedge fund was downsizing. But you still wanted the Hampton house, the club memberships, the first-class vacations. So this is my fault? Taylor stood abruptly. I'm not the one who committed federal crimes. You didn't ask questions when I paid cash for your Porsche, Jessica shot back. While they argued, Dad turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Can you help us, Brigitte? Please. Your mother and I will lose everything. Our home, our retirement. Your reputation? Jessica added bitterly. Isn't that what you're really worried about, Dad? What the country club will say when they find out. Dad flinched as if she'd slapped him. Perhaps she had, in a way. His golden child was revealing just how tarnished she truly was. Thomas, clearly recognizing this was not a situation where coffee service was appropriate, discreetly exited the dining room. I kept waiting. I said quietly, drawing everyone's attention. All these years, through all my struggles and eventual success, I kept waiting for someone in this family to really see me, to value what I was building, not because of money or status, but because it was important work, because I was pouring my heart and soul into it. I looked around at the faces of my family members. Mom's tear-stained, Dad's shocked, Jessica's defiant, yet broken, Taylor's calculating. Not once did any of you ask me about my work with genuine interest. Not once did you celebrate my accomplishments or console me through failures. You dismissed my passion as a hobby, my career as a phase, my independence as rebellion. Dad started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. When I needed support, you withdrew it. When I achieved success, you didn't know because you never bothered to ask. Now that my success is public and undeniable, suddenly I'm brilliant Brigitte, who you always believed in. Mom wiped her tears. We made mistakes, Brigitte. We're sorry. Are you sorry you hurt me? Or sorry you didn't recognize my potential value to the family earlier? I asked calmly. Her silence was answer enough. Jessica, perhaps sensing that her usual tactics wouldn't work, tried a different approach. Look, I know I've been terrible to you. I was jealous, okay? You were always smarter than me, and I couldn't stand it. But we're still family. Family, I repeated, testing the word. You sabotaged my investor meeting. You stole my early designs. You've mocked my career choices at every opportunity. Tonight, you humiliated me about food stamps in front of your friends. Is that what family means to you? Jessica had the grace to look ashamed, at least momentarily. I was wrong. I see that now. You see it now that you need my money? I corrected her. Taylor cleared his throat. Perhaps we could discuss this as a business proposition. A loan with favorable terms? Stop, I interrupted. This isn't a negotiation. I stood from the table and walked to the large windows overlooking the manicured grounds of Jessica's soon-to-be foreclosed mansion. The night was clear, stars visible despite the ambient light of wealth and privilege. I've known about the investigation for months, I said without turning. I've seen the evidence. I know exactly what Jessica did, how much she took, and who was harmed. I know that Mom and Dad remortgaged their home on her advice and will lose it when the business collapses. I turned back to face them. I also know that the federal prosecutor is prepared to file charges next week that could send Jessica to prison for up to 30 years. Mom began sobbing again. Dad seemed to age years before my eyes. Jessica sat perfectly still, like prey hoping the predator won't notice if it doesn't move. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. I've already spoken with the federal prosecutor. Given Jessica's lack of prior criminal record and my willingness to guarantee full restitution to all affected clients, they're open to a plea agreement with no prison time. Jessica's head jerked up, hope flaring in her eyes. But, I continued, it will involve full admission of guilt, surrender of all assets acquired with stolen funds, 5 years of probation, community service, and a lifetime ban from working in financial services. You've been negotiating on my behalf? Jessica asked, somewhere between grateful and offended. I've been protecting the family name and ensuring that the people who trusted their money to the family business don't lose everything because of your greed, I corrected her. And what about us? Dad asked. Your mother and I? The house will have to be sold to partially repay the clients, I said. But I've purchased a small condo you can live in. Not in Greenwich, not near the country club. Somewhere modest where you can start over. Dad opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it, seemingly recognizing his complete lack of leverage. As for the family business, I continued, I've established a trust that will purchase it, restructure it, and eventually return it to profitability. Not to enrich our family, but to preserve the jobs of the employees who did nothing wrong and don't deserve to suffer for Jessica's actions. You're taking over my business? Dad's indignation briefly overcame his desperation. I'm saving what can be saved, I corrected him, and ensuring that the family name doesn't become synonymous with fraud. Taylor, ever pragmatic, spoke up. And what about Jessica and me? Our home? I looked at my brother, in-law dispassionately. The mansion will be sold as part of the asset forfeiture. Whether you stay with Jessica through this is entirely your decision. I've made no provisions for you specifically. Jessica flinched at the implication that her husband might abandon her now that her wealth was gone. From Taylor's calculating expression, it wasn't an unfounded concern. Why would you help us at all? Jessica asked quietly. After everything I did to you? I considered her question carefully. Not for you, I finally answered. For the person I want to be. Someone who doesn't perpetuate cycles of harm and abandonment. Someone who makes decisions based on what's right, not what feels good in the moment. I picked up the Forbes magazine from the table and looked at my own face on the cover. The photographer had captured something in my eyes that I recognized. Not just determination, but peace. The peace that comes from building something meaningful, something that exists because you brought it into being. I spent years seeking your approval, I told my family collectively, trying to make you see my worth. What I finally realized is that my worth was never determined by your recognition of it. Jessica studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time. You really did it, didn't you? Built something amazing while we were all dismissing you. Yes, I said simply, I did. In that moment, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. For the first time, my sister was seeing me not as competition or as a failure, but as myself. Dad cleared his throat. What happens now? Tomorrow morning, Jessica needs to call this number. I handed her a business card for the federal prosecutor. She'll arrange to turn herself in, process the plea agreement, and begin making amends. You and Mom need to contact this person at my office. I gave Dad another card. He'll help you transition to the condo and manage the sale of the house. I moved toward the door, suddenly eager to leave this mansion with its chandelier and marble floors, its expensive emptiness. Brigitte, Mom called after me, her voice small. Will we still see you? I paused at the threshold. That depends on what you want from me now. If it's just my money or connections, then no. But if you're genuinely interested in knowing me as a person, in rebuilding something authentic between us, I shrugged. Time will tell. As I walked to my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Jessica had followed me outside. I don't deserve your help, she said quietly. No, I agreed. You don't. But you're giving it anyway. I nodded. Why? I looked up at the stars, the same ones I used to watch from our shared childhood bedroom window, because breaking cycles is harder than perpetuating them. Because being defined by how others treat you is a prison. Because I want something better for all of us, even if we don't deserve it. For the first time since we were very young children, Jessica hugged me. Not an air kiss, not a performative gesture for others to see, but a real embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I know, I said, gently disentangling myself. Now prove it by doing better. As I drove away from the mansion with its gleaming facade and crumbling foundation, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the weight of family expectation and disappointment, but the weight of my own need for their validation. In the morning, the world would know my name. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I was completely at peace with who I was, whether anyone else recognized it or not. 1 year later, the small cafe bustled with morning customers. I settled into my favorite corner table, nodding to the barista who already knew my usual order. Despite the Forbes cover and subsequent media attention, I could still move through the world relatively unnoticed when I wanted to. The blessing of having a face that didn't appear on television, talk shows, or social media. I'd made a deliberate choice to maintain a low public profile even after my identity was revealed. No speaking circuits, no celebrity CEO lifestyle, just focused work and thoughtful philanthropy. I opened my laptop to review the quarterly report for the foundation I'd established. The Second Chance Tech Initiative now provided coding education to over 5,000 students annually in underserved communities. We'd recently expanded to include a special program for people re-entering society after incarceration. People like my sister. Jessica had served no prison time as promised, but the legal consequences had been significant. All assets purchased with stolen funds were sold for restitution. Her reputation in Greenwich social circles was destroyed. Taylor had filed for divorce 3 weeks after the Forbes issue was published, unwilling to weather the storm of public humiliation and financial loss. Left with nothing but her clothes and personal items, Jessica had moved into a small apartment and begun her community service hours teaching basic business classes at a women's shelter. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she discovered she had a genuine talent for teaching. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Still on for dinner tonight?" Diane's bringing her famous lasagna. Austin says he's bringing the good wine, which probably means something with a screw top. "Love you, Mom." I smiled and replied with a quick confirmation. The transformation in my relationship with my parents hadn't been instantaneous or simple. There had been difficult conversations, tearful apologies, and painful recognitions of past hurts. But slowly, we'd built something new from the ashes of our old dynamic. Dad had taken a position managing maintenance for the apartment complex where they now lived. The work was physically demanding but straightforward, and I could see it gave him a sense of purpose after losing the business that had defined him for decades. More importantly, it had humbled him in ways that made genuine connection possible between us. Mom had returned to teaching piano, her first love before she became consumed with maintaining social appearances. She had 8 students now, and spoke about them with the kind of enthusiasm she once reserved for country club events. My phone buzzed again. A text from Jessica. "Group share tonight, still nervous but ready. Thanks for the encouragement yesterday." Jessica's journey toward redemption had been the most surprising development of all. After initially spiraling into depression following her public disgrace, she'd found her way to recovery through honest self-examination and hard work. Our relationship remained complicated. Some wounds were too deep for perfect healing, but we were building a cautious new understanding based on who we were now, not who we had been. "Miss Walker?" A young woman approached my table hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you Brigitte Walker, the founder of Secure Node?" I nodded with a smile. "That's me. I'm Jordan. I'm in your foundation's coding program." Her eyes shone with a familiar passion. "You came to speak to us last month, but I didn't get a chance to thank you. I just found out I got the internship with Diane's team." "That's wonderful news," I said warmly. "Diane only selects people she believes in completely." "It's changing my life," Jordan said simply. "Before your program, I was working 3 jobs just to make rent. Now I have a future." As she walked away after our brief conversation, I thought about how life moves in circles. 3 years ago, I had been the one working multiple jobs, struggling to survive while pursuing my dream. Now I could hold the door open for others walking a similar path. That evening, I hosted dinner at my home, not a mansion, but a comfortable house with a large kitchen where friends and family could gather around a table that had room for everyone. Diane brought her lasagna as promised. Austin arrived with wine that actually had a cork. My parents came bearing a homemade pie. Jessica arrived last, looking tired but centered in a way I'd never seen during her perfect life days. As we settled around the table, I looked at the faces of my chosen and biological family. Diane, who had believed in me when I was just a barista with a dream. Austin, who had worked without pay for months to help build something meaningful. My parents, humbled but finding new purpose. Jessica, stripped of pretense and slowly building an authentic life. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank you all for being here, for creating this circle of support and authentic connection, not based on what any of us have, but who we are." Diane smiled knowingly. She'd been telling me for years that true success had nothing to do with Forbes covers or billion-dollar valuations. "To seeing each other clearly," she offered, raising her glass. "To second chances," Jessica added quietly. "To building things that matter," Austin contributed. My parents exchanged a glance, then Dad raised his glass. "To our brilliant daughter, who taught us what real success looks like." I shook my head slightly but smiled. "To all of us, finding our way through failure and success with our humanity intact. As the conversation and laughter flowed around my table, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of exclusion and betrayal had been real. The struggle to survive and build something from nothing had been grueling. The satisfaction of proving everyone wrong had been sweet, but ultimately hollow. The real triumph wasn't on a magazine cover or in a bank account. It was in breaking cycles of conditional love and validation. In creating spaces where people could be valued for their authentic selves, not their performative achievements. In offering second chances, even to those who hadn't earned them. In the end, my greatest success wasn't building a billion-dollar company. It was building a life where I no longer needed external validation to know my worth and helping others find that same freedom. Have you ever had to redefine success in your own life? What helped you break free from seeking validation from people who couldn't see your true value? Comment below with your experiences. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to build something meaningful, whether anyone else sees its value yet or not.